So what was First Christian Church of Portland like, let's say, before COVID?
So I began here as the pastor of September of 2019. And prior to COVID, we had one worship service every Sunday morning in the sanctuary. It's a beautiful historic space. The congregation is located right in downtown Portland on what's called the South Park blocks. We're a few blocks from Portland State University. Pre-pandemic, we had one worship service on site, and all of our committee meetings, fellowship groups, choir rehearsal, kind of a pretty traditional standard format of disciple congregational life happened at the church building. In addition to that, we have a sandwich ministry. The congregation has a long history of being committed to care for people, specifically people in our local community. The congregation has been very supportive of global ministry partners. They're a strong leader in the denomination, a good disciple of Christ identity. So they do a lot of work with DMF, with Week of Compassion, but they also care for the local community. The sandwich ministry had been going on for about 25 years. And when I came, the format for that was every Wednesday, we would have volunteers come to church, meet in the church kitchen, make about 100, 120 sandwiches, put those in little Ziploc baggies with a sticker that says First Christian Church loves you, load them up in wagons, and then along with clean socks and some toiletries, personal hygiene supplies, the volunteers would head out downtown. And we had different wagons, different routes. Volunteers would walk and meet about some of the same people every week. There were some regulars who always knew Wednesday sandwich day, and they could count on a sandwich from the church volunteers. And that shifted and changed a lot with the coming of COVID, of course.
Right. So how did that change with the pandemic?
So the middle of March was our last worship service on site. As the pandemic was spreading in Oregon, we had a few members who self-isolated early on because of their own health concerns. It was a little uncertain just in terms of the timing in early March, kind of what was the best decision for churches to make. We were in conversation with our regional ministers. Being a downtown church, we're in strong partnership with other historic downtown congregations. And the UU church, their national leadership kind of immediately, swiftly announced no on-site worship for a year. We're just going online, and it was a swift, strong, clear decision. And a lot of the other churches downtown were trying to figure, do we go online? Do we do some kind of hybrid service? Initially, the early conversation was locally, we think churches should take 2 weeks off and not be on site for 2 weeks. And I contacted our regional ministers trying to discern, do we have church, do we not have church? This was like on a Thursday, we had a conversation about, do we worship in the building on Sunday or not? And so that one Sunday in March, we had, I think, about 30 people who came to worship. And everyone else was already kind of self-quarantining. We were anticipating the governor was going to issue a stay-home order, but we didn't know. And we had been scheduled, so we had choir rehearsal Thursday night. We'd been scheduled for, I don't remember if it was either a board or elders meeting that weekend. And I talked with the board chair, and we postponed that meeting. So there was nothing extra happening on site except for Sunday morning worship. And by the time we got to worship Sunday morning, it was very clear that there was going to be a stay home order, and it was what we needed to do in terms of safety. So Sunday morning before worship, I just announced that that would be the last time we would be together in the sanctuary. And there were some people, does that mean for 2 weeks? What does that mean? And we didn't put an end line on it. We just said, next Sunday we will offer worship online, and we'll let you know how to find us. And so then we had a week's scramble to get up and running. The very first week we were on Facebook Live, and then ever since then we've done both Zoom and Facebook Live worship. So in the midst of switching worship online, we also had the question, what about our feeding ministry? First Christian has long partnered with other agencies downtown. One of our strongest partners has been a group called Home PDX. They work primarily with the houseless community. And for a couple years, they had actually had a Wednesday night gathering on site. They would use our fellowship hall and have a meal. We had church volunteers come. We had a member of the congregation who would do free haircuts. There were video games. A lot of the folks who would come are young adults. We provide showers. There are 2 showers in the building, laundry facilities. So all of that used to happen on Wednesday nights. And we had a shift in that program early this spring, and they were kind of reconfiguring. So they weren't meeting on site, but they were still considered strong partners of the church and have connections with the houseless community. The other partner agency that we work with most closely is a group called Clay Street Table. And essentially they gather food from the Oregon Food Bank and help distribute it through multiple feeding programs throughout the week. And one of the ways that Clay Street connects with First Christian, we provide office space for their executive director and their bookkeeper. But we also counted on Clay Street to partner with Home PDX for those Wednesday night gatherings. Clay Street Table would bring local high school students in to help prepare the meal for the houseless community that was then served together. So it was an opportunity for high school students to be in conversation with the houseless community and to build a community of their own, to have a chance to serve together. So the first week of the pandemic, when it was clear that everything was shutting down, most of our volunteers for the sandwich ministry are retirees, and it really wasn't safe for them to come and make sandwiches and hand them out downtown, but we didn't want to just abandon friends on the street who were needing food on Wednesdays. At the same time, other feeding ministry programs downtown were shuttering their doors. Some related to volunteers, some related to funding, some just the chaos of the first week of COVID. There was a real strong feeding program at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church nearby, and they shut their doors completely, and no one was in the building. And Clay Street Table had worked with St. Stephen's. So we early on had a strong conversation with Clay Street Table, Home PDX, and our sandwich ministry leaders and said, what can we do? And most of the downtown feeding programs, their model was a church would fix a meal, people would come, sit indoors, eat a meal together, and then go back out in terms of food for the houseless community. And with COVID, that just really wasn't a safe practice. But our model of fixing food at the church and then taking it out and serving food outdoors is a safer way of sharing food. So First Christian, Clay Street Table, and Home PDX kind of intensified our partnerships and said, let's do this together. What is the need? What can we meet? So from that very first week of the shutdown, we began providing a meal at noon, Monday through Friday. And so we expanded just making sandwiches to making sack lunches. So the menu kind of varies depending on what's available at the food bank and what's donated. But we use the same wagons. We now have volunteers who come from about 6 different churches, as well as community groups, and then just individuals and families who want to volunteer. The home PDX friends, the houseless folks who had worked with home PDX previously are now part of our volunteer staff. So it's been kind of an interesting shift. Used to be housed people would come inside the church and take the food out. Well, we've flipped that, and now it's houseless friends come inside the church and fix the food, and it's housed friends who take the food out and serve in the community. So it feels a little bit like the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The out will be in and the in will be out. So we have 2 teams of houseless volunteers who coordinate those noontime meals. We have lots of other folks who make sack lunches, bring them to the church. They're put in wagons, hauled out in the community. So in the meantime, other ministries have expanded as well. So we do mobile lunch Monday through Friday. There's burrito night on Tuesday night. There's an early Saturday morning breakfast. And then on Sundays, the church kitchen is used to fix a hot meal that is taken across the Willamette River and served on the east side of Portland. So we're providing food 7 days a week. Additionally, we have 2 different pantry programs. So Home PDX fixes food boxes for the tent camps. So there's a pantry program for unhoused friends that Home PDX coordinates. And then Clay Street Table partners with another agency. This is a lot of names and probably more detail than you need, but they partner with another agency called Giving Tree and do pantry boxes for low-income seniors in downtown housing facilities. So there are a lot of low-income elderly who used to come to a food pantry to get food, but with COVID, it's safest for them to stay home during the shutdown. So what happens instead is Clay Street Table coordinates. The food comes from the Oregon Food Bank into First Christian Church, is reconfigured into small boxes, pantry boxes. Those are loaded up by volunteer drivers who take them to the downtown apartments. So a different apartment building of low-income subsidized housing will get a delivery every week. And then the apartment manager helps with distribution inside to people who've signed up for those boxes. So it's really kind of a food pantry delivery service. So the same food is going to the same people who were getting it before, but it's a totally different mechanism. Instead of people coming to St. Stephen's to shop and pick up their own groceries, all the food comes to First Christian, is reboxed, taken by volunteers. So it's just a lot of coordination to get that food delivered. An additional way that program has expanded is we now have culturally sensitive food for our Asian community. So a lot of the Chinese elders, there are certain foods that they really want or they really don't want, depending on what's coming from the food pantry. There might be things they don't even know how to fix or they don't want to eat. So we also have an Asian food pantry day. So about 7 tons of food goes through the church every week. It's sort of crazy.
Wow.
Worshiping on Sunday morning on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, this is a production. You know, it sounds like almost like a factory, or you know what I mean, something industrial. You know, so I'm gonna kind of switch the order of the questions I had a little bit because it seems more relevant to ask now. I've been to Portland once, and I understand that I don't know if houselessness, if that's a word, is an issue that residents of the city, yes,
huge issue.
And obviously food security is tied together with that. But is Portland, does it struggle as a city with food deserts? You know, is food just like really inaccessible, or community gardens not, a way of addressing this? I'm just wondering if this is a particular problem endemic to the area, or is it just kind of, late stage capitalism, you know? So what is your experience, or, you know, in your experience, what is why do you think this issue is something that you guys have really gravitated towards?
Well, I almost wish that I had asked Bruce Arnold, who's our partner with Home PDX, to come in and you could interview him, because he knows the history much better than I do, having been in Portland for less than a year. There are some food desert areas. A lot of the food insecurity in Portland is connected to economics. It's a matter of, for housed seniors, it's a matter of being able to afford, even though housing is subsidized, to afford housing and medication and food on a very limited income. And so a lot of times the end of the equation is just the food is what people will skimp on. The other folks who really face a lot of food insecurity are the houseless community. If you're living in your car or you're sleeping in a tent, just being able to prepare food can be a bit of a challenge. So some traditional food pantry programs might offer things that you can't necessarily fix if you're cooking over a camp stove, or you're living out of your backpack, or you're living in your car. So part of it has to do with the type of food as well as accessibility to it. There's one grocery store downtown, there's a Safeway within a few blocks of the church. But in terms of the population in downtown Portland, it's a pretty dense urban area. If there were more grocery alternatives nearby, that would provide an advantage for some folks. People with income don't necessarily struggle as much in terms of downtown living. Public transit is pretty good, and there are a lot of folks who have cars, and they can shop wherever they want, and there's high-end grocery stores of all kinds of wonderful foodie choices in Portland. It's a great place to eat if you have money. But it's kind of a complex question, and I think for us, partnering around the issue of food was just one specific way to help the houseless community. The congregation really has a heart for the issue of houselessness and how to help people who need shelter find affordable shelter. The cost of housing here is really extreme. It's interesting. I think the question of houselessness in Portland is a long-term issue that really needs to be addressed in concrete, specific ways. And the city hasn't yet found a concerted approach that works. So pre-pandemic, there was kind of a practice of folks who were unhoused would camp out in certain areas downtown, but on a regular basis, Portland police would do a sweep. And so if someone was camped out, the rule of thumb was, if you pitch your tent on a sidewalk, that's okay, but you have to be gone by 7 a.m. so that there's no evidence that you were ever here. So pre-pandemic, there was this pattern of people would find little nooks and crannies to camp at and sleep on city streets. There's no camping allowed in city parks, so nobody camps in parks, but they would pitch a tent on a city sidewalk. Well, once the pandemic came, some would say out of a response of compassion, the decision was made to stop those sweeps. That has its own controversy, because then there are some places where lots of tents have gone up in front of buildings where businesses are located, and then local business owners are concerned, when the shutdown's over and people can come back to work, will customers come back if people are camped out in front? So, I mean, we could talk for a couple hours about different aspects of houselessness. I guess to get back to the question about First Christian, solving the issue of houselessness in Portland, I think, feels bigger than something the church can tackle on its own, but feeding people who are hungry is one specific concrete step we can take. So since the church was already doing one little piece, these partnerships allowed us to do a bigger piece. And it's really a blessing for the congregation as well as the community, because a lot of our members who are older, who are staying home to stay safe, feel like the church is still doing ministry and the building is still in active service, even though we're not here for worship.
The church is still being the church.
Yes, the church is being a church. And we try very intentionally to use language that indicates it's not that the church is closed, but the church has left the building. The building is still open, but worship is happening online. And we talk about being a house church. Our worship service on Sunday mornings we call house church, because we're all in our houses, but we're still worshiping together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in my work with New Church Ministry, you talk a lot about that. I know I actually live in Toronto, and it's, city of 2.5 million. And I live right downtown, and this issue with I don't want to say issue, but houseless people pitching tents, and this proliferation of tent cities, and people kind of being shocked at, this happening, has really put into the spotlight, so many people, like, okay, there were houseless people before, but there weren't tent cities before. So it really shows, like, it just takes something like a pandemic, loss of a paycheck for a few months, and then you're over the edge, and you don't have anywhere permanent to stay. And I think, a lot of us are a lot closer to that happening than ever being a millionaire, gosh, yeah, you're right. I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, and we're very concerned what happens at the point when, so right now there's kind of a moratorium on evictions. So even if you've been laid off, you can't pay your rent, your landlord isn't going to kick you out. So you're still home. Maybe you're coming to get food, you're finding a way to get by, but at some point that's going to end and shift. And there's a real concern about an increase in houselessness whenever that happens, at whatever point in the pandemic, if we don't collectively, I think nationally as well as in Portland, have a strategy for what happens next. Because you can't expect all the landlords to fit the bill. But at the same time, if somebody has gone 6 months, a year and a half without paying rent, even if their job is back, they're not going to have 6 to 18 months worth of rent that they can pay. And so what happens at that point to that family or that person?
Yeah. And not everybody has the luxury of, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think we haven't seen the hardest part of the crisis. And on the one hand, it feels overwhelming right now that we're doing 7 tons of food through the church, but we're the smaller feeding programs happening in Portland. And what happens when the impact of layoffs really comes to full down the road?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on to my question.
This is what I pray about at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, oh man. Well, yeah, this is why we're in the I don't want to say industry, but the field that we're in, right? Like you
why
don't,
we answer the call. Why
you don't go into ministry not expecting,
So one other little story I'll share that you may or may not use or need. So we have a glass entryway that faces the South Park blocks. And one of the things that we've done in terms of a COVID specific response, we set up a table in that glass entryway. And then one at a time, individuals who are downtown, whether they're houseless or not, if they need food pantry items and they're not in the senior apartment delivery program, they can come to the church, they stand outside the window, and on the table, there's a display of, here are 3 kinds of beans that we have available, and people can pick, I want the black beans, I don't want the pinto beans. Here's canned fruit, I want the peaches, I don't want the pears. So they fill out a little order slip of what they would like in one bag of groceries. And the detail that's nice about that is that it still gives people a sense of choice, a sense of ownership, a sense of personhood. So it's hard enough to come to a church and say, I lost my paycheck, I need some food. Can you please help me? I mean, that is a huge step to be at a point in life, if you've never been there before, where you have to ask for help. But then for the response to be, okay, we know you need help. Here's a bag of groceries that's just like a bag of groceries that everybody else is getting, and maybe has stuff in it, you hate it, but take it. This is what we've got. Instead, there's an extra little 5 minutes given to the process for someone to say, this is my choice and this is what I would like. And it's really a tiny effort at preserving human dignity, even while social distancing happens outside. There's one person at the window, they put in their order, they go stand at the park, a volunteer fills their bag, then a little while later the bag comes out, their name gets called, and they go on with their day. But I really appreciate, that's something Bruce has been doing with us. I really appreciate that attention to recognizing individuals and the personhood, even in the midst of crisis.
I think I've actually been to your church, because when you were talking about the glass, I thought, oh, wait a second, you guys hosted NAPAD, the NAPAD.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was right before I came.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because I'm half Filipino, and so I'd gone to my
Excellent.
first convocation there.
Super.
Yeah, it's a great location with all the trees and everything like that.
Yeah.
Especially in the summer. Oh my God. I thought, the West Coast up there was supposed to be cool, and it was like the most humid summer. And I was staying at my friend's place, and her friend's, her housemate's room, which was like at the very tippy top of the house, and they didn't have any like AC, or I couldn't figure out how to work it, and I was like sweating my face off. But you know when you're staying at someone else's house, you like don't want to ask, like you're so, and
I'd be
I'm like,
polite guest.
yeah, and they're like, why did you turn on the AC? I was like, I thought Portland was supposed to be like Seattle, and it's raining all the time and cool. My God, no, not at all.
Speak up for yourself, Nadine, and ask, how do I turn on the AC?
Yeah,
next time you know.
I don't know. Yeah, next time, definitely. Okay, so we're trying to keep on track here. So, with all this, keeping this in mind, so I understand that DCEF helped your congregation get a PPP loan.
Yes.
So how did that, first off, was the PPP loan, why did you decide to get that? And then where did your decision come in to reach DCEF? And then third, and I can review these again, what was your experience like with DCEF?
So the congregation has had a significant financial impact during COVID. Our budget is substantially supplemented by having a parking garage. So several years ago, the congregation went through a process of redevelopment of the property. A portion of the building was about to fall down. The land was incredibly valuable, being right downtown. A lot of development was going on in the area around the church. And so a decision process was carried forward where the congregation intentionally made the choice to stay downtown. And in making that decision, they needed to optimize the resource of this location in terms of financial gain for the church. So the church owned an entire city block. And at that point, they made the decision to sell part of the block. So half of the block, since you've been here, Nadine, you remember that glass front entry that faces the park? Just next to the church, there's a huge high-rise condo apartment building, kind of upscale apartments. Those apartments were built on what used to be church land. So the church sold half the block to developers, and part of what they did was they sold the air rights above where the sanctuary is. So that means that the apartments are guaranteed a view high up. So the air above the church was valuable as well as the land. So the church worked with the developer to sell that property, and part of the agreement was to build new office space, which is where I'm located. So normally behind me, you'd be able to see the park, and to build a parking garage. So part of the parking is guaranteed for members, for residents who live in Ladd Tower, but part of the parking is public parking. And so that parking garage has been a source of income for the congregation to substantially supplement the budget. because the congregation has aged and decreased in size like many other mainline Protestant churches since the history of the congregation. You know, instead of having 300 folks in worship on Sunday, pre-pandemic, we had 80. There's no way that the current membership of the congregation could fund maintenance of the historic sanctuary, the property. So we've relied on income from the parking garage. Well, you can imagine with a shutdown of COVID, there are no parkers in the garage. There were no businesses open, so regular employees who parked there weren't coming back. There are no concerts and events at night. So a huge source of income for the church evaporated overnight and probably will not be back until the end of the pandemic, whenever that is. So in order to maintain current staffing for the congregation and support ministry and pay the bills to keep the lights on, we really needed to find additional sources of revenue. We did a one-time special capital campaign, not capital campaign, but a requested fund drive within the congregation. And some of our own members really stepped up with over and above gifts to supplement their regular giving, but there's no way that that could cover the shortfall. So we applied for PPP when we heard the payroll protection plan was coming and available. We applied immediately, first thing, with our local bank and got caught up in the mire of paperwork and can't happen and not going anywhere. And so we had gotten to the point where we knew in order to make it to the end of the year, we needed additional funding. So we contacted DCEF about a loan. There's a program offered of low-income loans specifically for disciple ministries during COVID. And it was in a conversation with Rosario to talk about the loan that she said, well, have you gotten the PPP? And we said, we tried, it wasn't gonna happen. There was just no way. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was kind of like, that was on a Monday or Tuesday, and there was 1 week left before the cutoff deadline of when PPP could be allowed. And Rosario said, well, I'm sorry that your bank wouldn't help you, but I've got somebody who can. And so our bookkeeper worked with a loan officer in Indiana who had specifically been paired to help disciple congregations through the PPP process. And with that individual's help, we were able to find another bank that gave us the PPP loan, and we got it in just under the wire in the nick of time. And we're so thankful. It truly is a huge, huge blessing for the congregation. So the PPP and the DCF lower interest rate loan will help the church get through the end of this year and continue the incredible feeding ministries that we're doing.
Okay, so the PPP loan and the DCEF loan are enabling you to continue your feeding ministry, which was, the 7-ton behemoth kind of thing that you had been doing beforehand. Okay. And does it also, because I know that you had applied because you weren't getting that income from the parking garage, does it help to cover some of that income?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is helping to payroll all of our staff and meet budget.
Okay, great. Awesome. I feel like that's my last question.
Okay.
But I feel like that seems like such a cutoff. So did you feel like the experience was, really, really seamless? And is it something that you would recommend to other congregations?
I would absolutely recommend to other disciple congregations to work with DCEF. I was very impressed with Rosario, with her support, the ease in which we went through the process. Actually, the initial conversation with Church Extension, I think may have been either with our bookkeeper or one of our trustees. And then Rosaria said, well, part of the process is we want to be sure to talk with the senior pastor just about how ministry is going. And so I was in a conversation with her, kind of like talking with you Nadine, where I was talking about the feeding ministries and the challenges of the church, that just almost in an offhand way, she said, well, we also want to be sure that, it sounds like you would qualify for the PPP. Have you applied? And then I gave her the whole sob story that we tried and it didn't work and gee, I'm stressed. And she said, well, let's make this happen. And she knew exactly the right person for us to contact. And it truly almost felt like a miraculous gift. We had really been worried about even just making payroll for our own staff through the end of the year. And the PPP made that possible. And we would not have gotten the PPP without the referral from Church Extension. So I absolutely recommend for disciple congregations and pastors to work with the Church Extension anytime they can, anytime they're in need.